Welcome to this video. Please, have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. I'm Cameron Holt, welcome back to Fantasy Forge, or welcome to Fantasy Forge if it's your first time here. Today I'm going to tell you guys a little story about my Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign. In my opinion, one of the best campaign modules currently available for 5th edition D&D, and you should probably check it out, because it's really good. Before we get started, warning! Spoilers for Waterdeep Dragon Heist! Before we hop into the story, I'm going to give you guys a brief rundown of kind of what happens throughout the book, as the story that I'm talking about today actually happened after the fact. Waterdeep Dragon Heist is a wonderful campaign module that starts your players off at level 1. You could start them higher if you want. We started at level 1. In the Yawning Portal, where everybody's just kind of chilling, having a drink, hanging out, when a troll with a bunch of blood-sucking sturges on it hops up out of the hole in the Yawning Portal that leads down to the Undermountain. Big, stupid, dungeonous, cavernous dungeon. I'm not a fan of Dungeon of the Mad Mage. But yeah, so a troll hops up out of the hole, and people start fleeing. The bartender, Durnan, hops over the bar top, runs out in front, essentially tells the characters, like, "You take care of the sturges and I'll kill this troll," because he's a super badass, and can. So there's a little bit of combat to introduce any new players to how combat works in D&D. After the fight, the party is approached by Volothamp Gudarm. Yes, Volo, of Volo's Guide to Monsters. He's in the game, as are some other title characters. So there's a little intro thing where Volo, his friend Floon, Blagmar, is missing. He wants somebody to go find them. He offers great pay and good drinking company, which you gotta be a little careful. I'll touch more on this if anyone's interested in like a how to run Waterdeep game, but here's a free tip. I played Volo as kind of a bit of a drunkard Englishman who's, you know, he's always working on his next book just as soon as he gets to the bottom of this pint. It makes him a little more likable and makes him seem a little bit less like an ass for when the party completes this quest and he's like, "Sorry, I don't have money, but here's the keys to a tavern," which honestly is a good pay, in my opinion. So the characters go on this little quest. There's some introductions to show that there's like a gang war going on in Waterdeep between the Zentarum and the Xanathar Guild. Yes, that Xanathar. Ultimately, your characters come across another NPC named Renaer Neverember, whose father is like the dude who was one of the masked lords of Waterdeep and was expelled, voted out, and apparently has a vault full of dragons, which is what gold pieces are called in Waterdeep, hidden somewhere under lock and key within the city. Renaer was a friend of Floon's, drinking buddy. In my game, they are lovers, because I thought that would be fun. Investigations lead the players down into the sewers, where they follow some little Xanathar-shaped chalk scrawlings on the walls, which leads them to a secret Xanathar hideout, one of many in the sewers. Here, they find Floon being tortured, because the Xanathar Guild thought that he was Renaer, and that he would know something about his father's hidden vault of gold. But it was a case of mistaken identity, and they've got the wrong guy. If your characters play their cards right, they'll make it through this little dungeon, take care of the half-orc sorcerer, or full-orc. This is why you keep the book on you. After defeating the half-orc apprentice wizard and saving Floon Blagmar, the players can return him to Volo, and are rewarded with the key to Trollskull Tavern, an old, abandoned, run-down tavern in Trollskull Alley, which is a very vibrant and wonderful place, in lieu of payment. Now, luckily, my players thought that this was a fair trade. Strangely enough, every player at my table, outside of one who wasn't with us at the time, used to work in the service industry at bars, myself included. It was kind of fun getting to take the reins on a tavern and using the rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide for running a business. It was neat. After the players get settled and put some gold into the tavern, got it reopened, the next chapter begins. There's a fiery explosion outside of the door. A bunch of people die, it rocks the city, City Watch shows up and are interrogating people. They've only got a little bit of time before the Watch shows up to kind of get their own bearings and do their own investigating, which my players did well. Eventually they find out that it was a Nimblewright, an automaton, that caused the explosion with a necklace of fireballs that was dropped into a little barrel of water nearby and running along rooftops. My players also rolled high enough to notice that someone survived the explosion and slunk away down the street and dropped into the sewers. We had a druid at the time who wild-shaped into a mastiff, which was very clever, used her innate smell to track this person all the way to Growland Manor. Now, there's a whole encounter that can happen inside this kind of mini dungeon of Growland Manor. My players snuck in, broke into the stables, stole a bunch of money out of some saddlebags, and then decided, we're done with this, and left. Which is totally fine. What happened next? This part's fuzzy in my brains. Also worth noting, during their time owning and operating the tavern, my players also joined the Emerald Enclave and took on some missions in order to gain the money necessary to put money into the tavern. After the explosion and going back to Growland Manor and feeling like the Growlands probably have something to do with this, the players were approached by the City Watch members that had interrogated them beforehand, who were coming around and letting everyone know how the investigation is going and that someone will be charged. The players then decided to go to the Temple of Gond to investigate this Nimblewright situation. There they met Valletta, the Dragonborn priestess of the Temple of Gond, who introduced them to Nim, a Nimblewright that still lives there. After a brief conversation with Nim, with Valletta translating as Nim only speaks in sign language, they discovered that there was another Nimblewright that was missing and Nim was trying to find. His only friend escaped into the world. He had created a little tracking device that would let the players know when they got close. So they took it and went out searching. They eventually came across the Nimblewright sleeping in an alleyway, slaughtered him in the street, and took the clues from his body. This leads to Chapter 4, Dragon Season, or the Encounter Chain. So another cool thing about Waterdeep Dragon Heist is that whoever the main villain is of the story depends on what season you choose to be playing in. We actually started in winter, so I had planned on the main enemy being Manshoon. But the players, in the way that the story was going, ended up taking a little bit more time, so I kind of pushed us into spring from winter so that Xanathar could become the main villain. Throughout this encounter chain, the players learn about the Stone of Galore, which is an aboleth that has been condensed into a stone or a magical item that can cast the Legend Lore spell and is the only source of knowledge about this Vault of Dragons. Their interest was piqued, and they wanted the Stone of Galore. As they should. There's a whole encounter chain here that I won't touch on too in depth because that's not what this video is about, but there are two encounters that are very important to our story. The first is Encounter 10, the Converted Windmill. Not only did this introduce a very fun NPC that I kind of shoehorned in, being just a random common squatter named Grum Brushley, he's just like a really happy-go-lucky guy. Man, just everything, man, that's so cool. That's really cool. That's awesome. You guys want to come inside? Grum informed the party about the people that they were looking for who live in an upstairs room who have a very fancy dwarven lock. Now they had found the key to this lock in the previous encounter in the mausoleum and confronted the two men living in this converted windmill. After forcing the information out of these men, they discovered that the stone was found by the man who had hired them in the mausoleum, a halfling necromancer named Lasser Merklav. No need to take notes, but remember that name for later. They tell the players about Lasser Merklav's secret sewer hideout beneath the Dandy Mop's wig shop, which is a fantastic name for a wig shop. And so the players set out for encounter number 9, the Cellar Complex. So this is another little mini dungeon where the players have to find their way into the sewers under Dandy Mop's and find the hideout with some hidden doors to find where Lasser Merklav is hiding. When they arrive, they're just behind a group of Xanathar Guild member Kenku, who have shown up in order to steal the stone from Lasser. The party comes across, first, a room full of skeletons. They decide to nope out of there and check out another hallway first. But upon returning, all of the skeletons are gone. They follow through into the last chamber, where Lasser is pinned in the corner, crying, as 2 of his skeletons are defending him from 2 Kenku. There are also a couple dead Kenku and dead skeletons. That's redundant. Re-dead skeletons on the floor around him, and the Kenku are about to kill him. The players saved Lasser Merklav and questioned him about the stone. I'm actually going to read this part from the book for you. If the characters demand the Stone of Galore, Lasser tells them the truth. He surrendered it to the Kenku, 2 of which fled south with it. In Area B8, the characters see 1 Kenku standing over the bodies of Lasser's murdered human apprentices, Retchen and Krila. This Kenku is joined by Xanathar's Gazer. The Kenku and the Gazer try to hold off the characters for as long as possible, buying time for a second Kenku to flee with the Stone of Galore. If the characters pursue the stone and leave Lasser alive, he eventually slips away and retreats to Area B11. The players made short work of the Kenku and the Gazer and continued on after the second Kenku who has the stone. Now, funny thing, the book never mentions Lasser Merklav again. Even if the characters leave him alive, there's just a halfling necromancer living in the sewer that we never talk about again. It states earlier on that he's collecting dead bodies to build an undead army for some reason. It doesn't tell us why. So, the characters run off after the stone, Losser stays behind, and that's it. But what if more? At this point I should introduce our characters. First up is 2, played by Taylor Higginbotham, soon to be my brother-in-law. 2 is a Warforged Horizon Walker Ranger. He doesn't know much about his own past, only that he was awakened 5 years ago, served a noble family of Waterdeep, was fired after he failed in protecting one of them, and has since become an adventurer, out of necessity, more than anything else. Next up is Minnie Langley, played by my sister. Minnie's a half-elf fighter from a commune just outside of Waterdeep that was recently destroyed, and her cat went missing. If you want to know a little bit more about Minnie and her cat, let me know in the comments below, and I'll touch on these characters more in depth in another video. And lastly, for this section of the game, are Stormdust, the Furbolg Druid, Kazoo, the Drow Bard, and Billy Becker, the Tiefling Gunslinger. All played by my beautiful and talented girlfriend, Samantha Zuckerman. She, I promise I'm not biased, she wasn't feeling the druid, Stormdust, so she stepped aside to Kazoo, the bard, who sadly died in a fight with Xanathar, was resurrected, and then died again from a mind flayer in another fight with Xanathar. But that's a story for another time. The main one we need to focus on is Billy Becker, the Tiefling Gunslinger. So, 2, Minnie Langley, and Kazoo, the Drow Bard, their new friend, after Stormdust decides she's gonna just kind of take care of the tavern, adventuring's not really for her anymore, which is fair. They acquire the Stone of Galore, find the Vault of Dragons, lure Xanathar there, kill him, losing only Kazoo in the process, and gain entry to the Vault of Dragons. Inside the vault, they come across Billy Becker, a tiefling and a member of a group of thieves who had found their way into the Vault of Dragons beforehand, who was just standing staring at a cursed mural on the wall, transfixed for days. Until the players arrived, thankfully succeeded on their saving throws, and shook her out of it. She was a little apprehensive at first, but she decided to stick with the group for the promise of her share of the dragons. The new party meet Arnax the Gold Dragon and promise him some new jewels to eat if he'll part with some of the coins for them, which he was super into. Now this brings us ultimately to the end of the material inside of Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and we decided a while back that we wanted to continue on, but I didn't have everything that I needed on hand as far as like the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide and other modules that take place in Faerun. So we decided pretty early on that our Waterdeep is set in my homebrew world of Kavora on the continent Windmill. You can learn more about this in my D&D Pokemon Fusion series, as all of the creatures that I create there have lore based within this world. There's a link right here if you're interested. Subscribe. Do it for Juicebox. My dog's name is Juicebox. I'm not gonna. You won't get a Juicebox if you subscribe. So at this point, the adventure's over. The characters are running Troll Skull Tavern, having a good time, but adventure always has a way of calling. You see, Minnie still hasn't found her cat. She gets her first lead on Kieran, her missing cat, from Vincent Trench, the disguised Rakshasa private eye and owner of Tiger's Eye across the street from Troll Skull Tavern. His information sends the characters on a quest outside of Waterdeep for the first time as a group, where they explored this new expansive countryside, making friends, making some enemies, learning about themselves and learning about each other, saving the city of Chilrun from its vampire-controlled Oathbreaker paladin overlords, which, using paladins as an enemy, one of my best ideas so far. They continue exploring the countryside, learning each other's backstories, and growing close bonds as a party. At this point, they've been on the road for upwards of 5 or 6 weeks in-game. While on the road, they also find out that their tavern was broken into, and the Stone of Galore, which they left behind, was stolen. They were robbed of all of their money. The villains who broke in worked for the Zentarum, found the Vault of Dragons, killed the dragon in the vault, and took all of the money for themselves, filling the power vacuum left by the destruction of the Xanathar Guild. Eventually, they arrive in Dark Pines, several weeks later, and hear troubling word of a calamity in Waterdeep. Their first thought is, oh great, what has the Zentarum done now? But things aren't that simple. there's been an influx of refugees from Waterdeep to Dark Pines. The sheriff, who they've done a little work for, directs them to one of these survivors. An Earth Genasi wizard by the name of Ewan Winters, who may sound Scottish, but I assure you he talks with a very French accent. Ewan Winters is a super cool guy. He's a wizard, he knows magic, already awesome. He's also got a prosthetic leg, which is super high tech and kind of borrowed from Eberron. Super cool, has an eye patch, some battle scars. This dude's pretty weathered. Cause he's an Earth Genasi. Oh, my jokes are bad. He informs the party that the city of Waterdeep has been overrun by the undead. He's been doing his best to help shepherd people out of the city into safety until it grew too dangerous. He spoke of a giant skull with a singular hole for one eye floating through the streets. Now, you're probably pretty certain what happened, but there's still a little more to it than that. Also, it had been several months in real time since the party had had their run-in with Lasser Merklav, so they weren't exactly connecting the synapses yet. At this point, the party was level 8, I believe, so it was still pretty dangerous for them to take on an entire city the size of Waterdeep, full of undead. Eventually, they traveled to an area known as the Spiral Wood, and came across an ancient elven ruin that, once they discovered the secret to the puzzle, they realized that the statues offered visions and information in exchange for years of your life, which was actually a random encounter turned very helpful. If you recall from a little earlier, 2 is a Warforged. It states in the Eberron book that Warforged don't really have a lifespan. They could go on living indefinitely. So, 2 decided to ask some questions. Through his questioning, he learned a couple of things. He found that Lasser Merklav was no longer a small halfling necromancer. He had grown into a large fiend, making a deal with a demon to become a demon himself, to get his revenge on the masked lords of Waterdeep, who had lorded over him for most of his life. He commanded an army of undead and demons that do his bidding, and sits on the throne at the palace of Waterdeep, defacing and desecrating the city as he goes. He even reanimated the dead body of Xanathar, the dead Mind Flayer which had killed Kazoo, as well as the recently deceased golden dragon body of Aranax. Through their powers combined, they overtook the city, taking out the colossal statues that are said to be the protectors of Waterdeep, and ultimately driving the city into ruin. But this was the party's home, and they weren't just going to roll over and take this. So they set out looking for survivors. They discovered that Volo had made it out alive, as well as Melanor, the leader of the Emerald Enclave. Grum Brushley and his 2 children had also made it out, in addition to Renaer, Never Ember, and Avi, the Water Genasi who worked at Steam and Steel, across the street from them in Trollskull Alley. They also learned that there were several people being held captive within the palace. So, they gathered their forces with those who were willing to fight with them by their side. At level 10, they rode back into Waterdeep to cut the head off of the snake. Oof, I almost forgot something super important. In their travels, like right after they left Waterdeep, they came across our 4th player, who's outside of our little family bubble, but don't worry, she plays with us on a laptop through Discord, so everybody's still safe. She's playing Credence Clearwater, or Cree for short, a Tiefling dragon sorcerer, who instantly fit in with the party. She just wants to make art, chill, and not go on the mission that she was prescribed by her tribe to find the dragon and serve the dragon from which she gets her powers. Because that seems like a bad time. Spoilers, it is. With the help of some very brave NPCs, namely the ones that I mentioned before, the party set off by sea to approach Waterdeep from the coast, stealth their way ashore, make their way as quietly as possible into the Palace of Waterdeep, and take out the new demonic form of Lasser Merklav. Surprisingly, things went pretty well for the most part at the beginning of that session. With the help of Pass Without a Trace from 2 and Ewan Winters, and another group of priests, knights, and a paladin that were helping out, the party split up into 3 groups and made their way towards the Palace of Waterdeep. Now, their first goal was to get the prisoners underneath the palace and get them out. Goal number 2, find and destroy Lasser Merklav, in hopes that that would break his control over the undead and return them to their fully dead states, which thankfully was the right call. So, they're making their way back. They almost get caught by a group of ghouls and flesh golems that are roaming through the streets, but thankfully aren't noticed. However, as soon as they sneak into the palace, they are confronted by the 2 Barl Gura guards that are working for Merklav. They make quick work of them, rush through the halls, following 2's vision, down into the cellar complex. There are a couple of traps that get triggered, but everybody's okay for the most part. But spell slots are getting a little low, and hit points as well. Keep in mind, Ewan Winters is only level 7 at this point. Volo is using Volo's stat from the book, which is pretty much just a mage. And Renaer is just a swashbuckler. So, the party decides that their best course of action is to have a group of the NPCs take the prisoners back to the ship and wait for them to arrive back. They do so, splitting off, and thankfully, thanks to some lucky rolls on my part, made it to the ship unharmed. And with the help of a magic carpet that Kree had found at a wizard's tower, but that's also another story. So, all that's left in the prison below are 4 party members, Billy, 2, Minnie, and Kree, as well as Volo and Renaer Neverember. Making their way up, 2 decides to scout ahead. He makes his way into a large chamber, sees the undead body of Laeral Silverhand, the former open lord of Waterdeep, that has just been fully desecrated and is still animated, standing in this large open throne room. Then, dropping down from the ceiling, is the huge form of Lasser Merklav, the halfling necromancer who has now become a Balor. So for those of you who don't know, there are some rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide about how to scale combat appropriately for the characters that you're using. The most effective way that I have found is the XP method, where there's a table that lets you know like at what level your party members are, how many experience points they need to have, or how many experience points they have, and you can then multiply that by the number of players that you have, and use that number to kind of use the XP of different monsters to fill out an encounter. It sounds really confusing. If you take a look at the charts, it's much easier than it sounds. So for this group, not including the NPCs that are with them, which, let's face it, are pretty inconsequential, a hard encounter would be a creature or creatures that equal 7,600 experience points. Okay. A deadly encounter would be a creature or creatures that equal to 11,200 experience points. Now, that being said, a Balor has experience points equal to about 22,000 XP. This is an incredibly deadly encounter. The Balor has a whip that has a reach of 30 feet. When it hits you, you have to make a strength saving throw. It's like DC 20, and if you fail, you get pulled 25 feet closer to the Balor. Oh, also the whip is wreathed in flame, and once you're pulled in, it can then use its second attack to swing at you with its electrified greatsword. This thing is a mountain of hit points with a higher AC than it should have, and it's meant to kill parties. It's meant to single out a party member and destroy them. So 2 runs into the room alone, and initiative begins. A harrowing fight ensues. Things are looking really bad. Yeah, the Balor even critted a couple of times with its lightning sword, which instead of doing the usual 2 times damage, actually does 3 times damage. And that's like 3d8 times 3, plus something. I don't have the numbers directly in front of me, but it was not looking good. Everyone was getting low. It was a bad time. And having forged such a relationship with Volo and Renaer, the 2 they're in it. They weren't going to run away. So we reach a certain point where Volo is knocked unconscious. He's making death saving throws. He's also within the range of the Balor, so that every time it starts its turn, he's automatically failing death saving throws. 2 is using his slippers of spider climbing to rush up the wall when he is hit once again with the whip and pulled from the wall. Now at this point, the Balor swings at 2, but misses, thanks to Sanctuary having been cast on him by Billy, who is now no longer a gunslinger, but an artificer as well. However, falling from 20 feet up onto the stone floor is enough to knock 2 unconscious, and he loses 2 death saving throws as the Balor lands a hit. Now at this point, Minnie, the half-elf fighter, rushes forward with just an epic roll. She uses this really cool desecrated greatsword that I homebrewed called the Silver Stake, which essentially captures the souls of creatures that it kills, and then you can use those souls as charges to do extra d12 necrotic damage. It's a nasty sword. She uses it to essentially decapitate the Balor, just like piercing it through its skull, and doing so feels incredibly triumphant. This super long combat encounter is coming to an end, but when a Balor dies, it bursts into flame in a 30-foot radius. Tu and Volo are both inside of this radius. And it's the exact amount of failed death saving throws required for both of them to be fully killed. There's an explosion of flame. Minnie is somehow still standing. Billy was just outside of the range. Renaer is pretty much untouched, thankfully, due to none of his attacks landing and the Balor not even noticing that he entered the room. But Volo lies dead on the floor, as does Tu. Now at this point, Cree steps forward with an item that they received back when they saved the city of Chillrun from those vampires. An item that I borrowed from Dimension 20, known as the Last Phoenix Egg. The way that this item works is you can essentially trade lives to resurrect someone who's died. So if you kill something, you can use its soul to revive the soul of someone who's died. Now, since the only other one in this fight that had died was Lasser, she had to choose between Tu and Volo. And I mean, obviously she's not going to choose the NPC. Why would she? So Tu is brought back, although he has a very touching scene when he is dead, where he's kind of like in the afterlife and he sees this like kind of teenaged boy talking to him who he finds out, like a human, who he finds out was his brother. And he looks down at his hands and sees that he also was a human, which Tu didn't have this knowledge before. Being a Warforged, he didn't know where he came from. He knew that his mind had been altered, but he didn't know how frequently or what was being hidden from him. So that was a nice kind of reveal moment before he comes back. Came back with a full accent change and like more of an understanding of who he is, which was really cool. From there, the party having won their biggest fight yet, which like I cannot stress enough, more of them should have died. It's absolutely insane. It is absolutely insane that only one NPC and one player character died. That's nuts. Again, not my goal to kill off the party. I want them to have tough fights but be victorious and feel like heroes, like they've earned it. But this was literally like twice double the number that should have been a deadly encounter, and they didn't blow through it by any means, but like I was incredibly proud of them. They made their way outside and found that all of the undead in the city had returned to their just dead states, and carried Volo's body back to their skiff, rowed back out to the boat, and did what Volo would have wanted and gave him a Viking funeral in one of the skiffs on the ocean. And that's where we ended the session. As I'm recording this episode, our next session is tonight. There's going to be a full 1-year time skip, and I honestly at this point don't even know what everyone's plans are during that time. I told them that they could use it to like learn a language or like bump up a skill if they wanted to, gain a proficiency, something like that. Or if there's anything like narrative that they want to check out, we can do that, and there may be some roles required. But I don't know how it's going to go yet, and I'm very, very excited to see how they rebuild Waterdeep. So that is how my players were responsible for the death and rebirth of Waterdeep. If you like this video and you want to hear more, subscribe to Fantasy Forge, and let me know in the comments down below if you want to hear more D&D stories like this. It was a lot of fun to actually like sit and get to kind of reminisce and recap a little bit. And I merely scratched the surface of the things that these characters have done and everything that they've been through. We've been playing for months now. So if you're curious and you want to learn more about the adventures of the Guardians of the Phoenix, let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe for more D&D content. Once again, I'm Cameron Holt, and I will see you in the next video. But until then, stay safe out there, adventurers.